Welcome to week 10 of the NFL season. It's the War Room powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe. In the saddle, double digits, a lot going on, a lot to get caught up on. So if you're tuning in, remember you can check us out on YouTube, and we're going to follow our tweets. So use that hashtag War Room. We'll get to your questions there. Of course, you can also hop in the room. Subscribers can always do that. But Pat Thorman is with me today. Pat, another interesting week, a lot of dilemmas. How you doing today?
I'm scrambling like the rest of Fantasyland is. Just what we were talking about before we went live. Eddie Lacy is inactive, so James Starks, baby, get him in your cash lineups. Get him in your season-long lineups. Yeah, all the Starks.
Yeah, it was funny because that was the dilemma I was dealing with, and you know, it's just tough sometimes when you hear coaches say, well, I like one running back, but we have two running backs, and then you're a little off there, but they just made the decision so easy. You love when that happens, and Starks is about as chalk as it gets. And Pat, I don't know if you're experiencing this, but like this week, a lot of weeks I'll come into the Sunday morning and I'm like tweaking lineups left and right. I'm almost making new lineups for DFS. This week was so chalk that I barely had to touch the lineup. So I don't know if you've seen that this week, or is it a little eerie to you, like ominous? But
yeah. I mean, I felt the same way. But with all the movement this morning, and we were also talking before the show about the wind in Oakland. You put my mind at ease. It sounds like it's not going to be quite as bad, but that's something we got to keep an eye on. So there is a lot of movement to be made now, and over this next hour and a half before kickoff. We are going to be tweaking once again.
Yeah, we're always tweaking. Not twerking, though. No. That would be pretty gross. But yeah, our friends over at NFLweather.com, if you don't check these guys out, they are just a great resource, and they have kind of everything you really need for weather purposes, plus like the historic research that they do. But yeah, they're reporting right now, they're calling it breezy and partly cloudy with 20-mile-an-hour winds. So to me, I'm not overly concerned about that. That's not going to move me off Crabtree at all. I like Crabtree a lot. I love the deep targets. 9th in the league entering this week in deep targets of over 20 yards or more. Had 5 of them last week. Of course, he had 2 touchdown receptions on those. And if you compare him to Amari Cooper, it's not close. Cooper, 4 deep targets on the year. 16 for Crabtree, 4 for Cooper. So we know who the deep threat is there. Very important to note. So lots going on here, and you can certainly get your questions answered in the chat. And we actually do have a question to kick off here from George. Certainly not a first time, but is a long time for us here. And he's asking, Mike Evans, TJ Yeldon, or Devontae Adams. Pat, I don't have information on whether this is a PPR or not, but I don't know if it really matters. What are your thoughts here?
No, I'm definitely on Evans with this one. Yeldon's got a tough run defense matchup, and Adams, he's not going to see nearly the volume that Evans will, especially with VJax out. ASJ is going to be out again. So yeah, it's all Evans for me.
Yeah, he had the best worst game ever. And hey, the volume is what you like here. This is a game, it could be a really interesting game script. I'm curious how it works out. You can certainly run the ball in the Dallas Cowboys. Sean Lee's out in this one, so obviously that's a downgrade to the defense as a whole. He's the heartbeat, the pulse of that defense. He's the brains of that defense. He's really kind of everything to them. So this is going to be a tough one for the Cowboys, but that does potentially bode well for the passing game as well. I mean, it is a good matchup for Dallas. And Matt Castle, crazier plays have been made, honestly. And especially if you play on Yahoo, Matt Castle's $22. Yahoo is so hard to get a good quarterback in your lineup. So, hey, I'm actually going to use Matt Castle this week in cash game plays. But the other question here is an IDP question. He's asking about C.J. Mosley or Bobby Wagner. I don't care about the matchup. It's Bobby Wagner. C.J. Mosley, something's off with him this year. His tackle production has decreased. Darryl Smith's tackle production has increased. And so for me, I'm going to lean towards Bobby Wagner. Not necessarily a great matchup against Arizona, but one that I expect this team to be really juiced up for. Brian Hall asked a question about Alshon Jeffrey's injury, Pat, and he needs 2 out of Dez Bryant, Alshon Jeffrey, and Mike Evans. Now, that's a pretty interesting dilemma, but I'm not really concerned about Alshon Jeffrey's injury. You know, we saw him not practice during the week, then got limited work in on Friday. That's more veteran rest than anything. I don't expect him to sit here. But, Pat, what are your thoughts on these 3?
Yeah, there was something that came across this morning that Jeffrey looked fine in warm-ups. So, you know, that erases what little doubt you would have about him. It is a little closer for me with Dez and Evans. I'm still going to side with Evans here. Because he's going to get a little more volume, I would imagine, and he does have the better quarterback. And it's tough. I mean, I love Dez. He's my man. But until Roma gets back, it's really, really hard to trust him. And especially that this is PPR with the volume for Evans, that's the way I would go.
Yeah, it's super close. I have Alshon for me automatic, but Evans 10, Dez Bryant 11. So it's very, very close, but I do agree there. And Greg saying the last 2 DFS spots can go Jordan Reed, Oakland, Baltimore, Tampa. I guess I would probably leave Baltimore there, or Marty B and Carolina. This is actually a dilemma that I was going through. Maybe you could tweak it around a little bit, see if you can keep Carolina in there and go Jordan Reed. Or, Pat, I think the play for me, though, might actually be Jordan Reed and Baltimore. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Reed is almost, especially in cash for me, he's kind of like a free square. I'm just plugging him right in for his price and for expected volume and matchup. The Sharps are on Washington. The Saints opened up as a 1-point favorite, and now it's swung to Washington. So there is some sharp money on the Redskins, and I would side with Jordan Reed in this case.
Yeah, DFS, it's an interesting landscape. Brian Hall not happy living in Washington State, but Greg in New York as well. Hey, I don't know. I don't get it. When something gets too big like this, of course, people are going to want to get in on the action, especially when the money is like it is. So we'll have to see with New York. Don't know what's going to happen there, but fingers crossed for the best here. It's just good for the industry across the board if people realize this is a skilled game. If this is not a skilled game, then why have I had 3 losing weeks in the last 2 years, right? I'm getting lucky, Pat. I'm getting really, really lucky. So anyway, and yet I stink at blackjack and roulette so much so that I don't even want to play those games. So there you go. But let's look at this active, inactive here as we're going through. And obviously, right off the bat, we get the big news that Eddie Lacy, blanking on forgettable name, is inactive. So James Starks now becomes a really intriguing play in a game where Green Bay is heavily favored against a Detroit team that has basically rolled everybody out of their front office, their coaching staff, except the coach, by the way. Interesting head coach. I don't know what's going on there, why you wouldn't take him out first. But regardless, a team that has struggled on the defensive side of the ball, has no identity offensively, has a quarterback who cannot identify blitzes. It's just a bad scenario across the board. Now, keep in mind, the Green Bay offense or defense has struggled this year. All those narratives about them being this great defense, I don't see it. They can let up some big plays. So Calvin Johnson, I mean, it sounds like he's active. He's fine. You know, you could possibly throw that into a GPP, more DFS talk, or that's a thought there. But I love Eddie Lacy. Pat, any other thoughts about this game?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm obviously all about the Packers. They're returning home. They run 50% no huddle at home versus about 12 or so percent on the road. So they're going to crank that pace back up. Starks was pretty involved when they did crank it up last week in the second half with Rodgers. He's an outlet on blitzes as well. So I mean, Starks is going to be heavily involved all game long. And like you said with Megatron, if as expected, the Packers are up 11-12, 2 touchdowns. They're going to be airing it out, and so you're going to get a volume play with Megatron. And like you said, the Packers have been known to give up a few big plays. So if you want to stack that game, that's more than smart to put a bunch of Packers in and then put Megatron on the other side.
Yeah, we're speaking of Packers here. We do have a question from John in a PPR. The flex play between Devontae Adams and T.J. Yeldon. I think this is pretty close. What do you think, Pat?
Well, I mean, PPR. Oh, Yeldon gets a lot of targets. Yeah, I would probably, if the safer floor play is T.J. Yeldon. If you're shooting for ceiling, I would go with Devontae Adams. I guess that depends on what you think of your matchup.
And you also have to think about game scripts potentially here. This could be a blowout where you may not get much from Adams. I think that, yeah, the safer play is Yeldon here. Look into the Vegas lines, too. You like the fact that, well, I mean, they opened at a 50, but now they're around a 46.5, 47 range, depending on your source for the over-under. But Jacksonville maybe having to push the pace a little bit in this game as road underdogs. So maybe some volume there for Yeldon. Not good at scoring rushing touchdowns in Jacksonville. That's the one concern. But still, I think I lean Yeldon there as well. We'll get to some of these other questions in a minute, but I wanted to check in on the Dallas and Tampa Bay inactive report. Didn't get Dallas yet, but we do have Tampa Bay. We had a question about Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Not Austin Jenkins. Guys, if there's a hyphen in the last name, you say both last names. Somebody was like, should I start Jenkins at tight end? I'm like, who is Jenkins? But anyway, Seferian-Jenkins is inactive, okay? So we're getting him out of our fantasy lineups. Vincent Jackson, we mentioned earlier, inactive as well. So that means heavy, heavy, heavy volume for Mike Evans. Mike Evans can concentrate. And we've seen players go through bouts of the dropsies, Pat. We saw Brandon LaFell. We've seen Jordan Matthews, and these guys have rebounded, so it's certainly not out of the question that Evans can rebound and have a pretty massive day here. But any other thoughts about Tampa Bay today?
Yeah, well, you mentioned before about Doug Martin and the Cowboys' run defense. Without Sean Lee, historically, they've been a sieve against the run. So Martin is definitely a guy that they're going to probably lean on as much as they can, as long as the game stays close, which it should. And yeah, with Evans and the drops, it's like, were you worried about drops if it's going to cost a guy playing time or looks, and that's not a worry for Mike Evans. So I mean, he's getting 20 targets a game. He's going to be tired. He's running up and down the field. He's going to make a few drops. Terrell Owens used to drop the ball all the time, and you wanted him in your lineup. So I wouldn't sweat it.
Yeah, drops are maybe the most overrated gauge of a player's ability. I'm not really worried about the drops at all. The volume, the targets, that's what we want. We worry about the drops when the drops become an issue of the players not getting targets, but that's not going to be the case here. So certainly like Evans there. Mike Conrad is a little bit afraid of playing Calvin Johnson today. Tavon Austin or Calvin Johnson. Pat, I'm not worried about Tavon Austin or about Calvin Johnson being a decoy in this game. Yes, he was downgraded to did not practice, but we've seen this out of Calvin Johnson before. We've seen him go out and not play particularly well. I think we're going to see that across the board for this offense, but it's still not enough for me to get him out of my lineup. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts there.
No, I mean, it would have to be a closer closer comp than Tavon Austin for me to seriously consider that switch. I do like Austin in his own right. He has been getting a pretty good amount of volume himself, which kind of makes him a higher floor play than you would imagine. But in this case, between these two players, it's pretty clearly Calvin.
Yes, Matt Miller asking about Marshawn Lynch. 50-50 to go in the game, and obviously not doing us any favors here with the later starting time. And he asks, is it time to pick up Thomas Rawls? Oh, you dropped Rawls for White. Yeah, and your wire opens back up at noon. Get Rawls immediately. Actually, I would prefer Rawls to White, because here's the thing. If LeGarrette Blount goes down, White isn't a number one. He's in an RB1. If Lynch goes down, Rawls could be an RB1. See, there's a huge difference between those two players. All the people who ran out and grabbed James White this week, I think you might be a little disappointed. And we could see a little bit of Brandon Bolden. This is not a case where we just insert and now we get Dion Lewis 2.0. So, hey, I would run out. I would get Rawls immediately. You're asking, should you drop White, DGB, or Burfict? I'm dropping White there, no question about it. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I agree, and especially this week, I think it shapes up for the Patriots to be more of a LeGarrette Blount game in general. So I'm not sure White is going to be a guy who is as hot of a pickup next week as he was this week. And like you said, if Blunt goes down, they'll probably throw in Bolden in the short term, and then they'll go re-sign Jonas Gray or something. Because yeah, like you mentioned, it's not a one-for-one comparison. He's not right behind. Rawls is definitely the more valuable handcuff and player in general.
And Greg, with I guess was that the Safarian Jenkins question? He's down to Jordan Cameron or Owen Daniels. Well, you're not going to play Owen Daniels. No. You have to play Jordan Cameron. Something to consider, though, the Eagles are giving up the 32nd most fantasy points per game, I could say it that way, or the least fantasy points per game to tight ends. They haven't given up a receiving touchdown to tight end since week 5, only 1 on the season, and no tight end has gone over 100 yards against them this year. Jordan Cameron, really iffy today. Not really crazy, especially with Kiko Alonso back. We'll be able to cover the tight end a little bit. Looks like D'Amico Ryans is going to go in this one, too. By the way, don't start Kiko Alonso in IDP leagues. Michael Kendrick's the only guy who you want to rely on this week. So still waiting on some of these injury reports, but maybe we can fast forward to a couple other games here. Dallas still not getting Dallas here, but going to Carolina, and Luke Kuechly is active. No big surprise here. Jonathan Stewart is active, despite what NFL.com says that he's inactive. No, he's active in this one. So no worries there. And then on the other side of the ball with the Titans, Kendall Wright is going to be inactive. We expected that one. And Jason McCourty also inactive. So also expected that. No activation for David Cobb just yet. So we'll get more Antonio Andrews here. I am probably Antonio Andrews' least favorite or least fan, lowest. I don't know what you call me. I mean, I'm sure he's a wonderful human being, but I just don't get it. He's Mike Tolbert with like 20 pounds less. Yeah, Sean Green with this much more burst. I don't know. I don't get it. I'm not really that high on him. He's super low ceiling, somewhat high floor, I guess. I don't know. I'm not that high. But Pat, thoughts on this Panthers-Titan game? Anything stick out to you?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the Panthers play. They're going on the road for the first time in about a month. They had 3 straight home games. So it seems like it might be a little bit of a letdown spot if you buy into something like that. They also significantly go slower paced, much less no huddle on the road. So and they performed well with the no huddle while they were at home, so especially Cam Newton. So I'm interested to see if they take that on the road with them. But yeah, it's going to be a pretty low ceiling game in general. Cam Newton's always a tournament option for DFS, and he's a guy who can run for 2 and throw for 2 and win you a tournament. So you got to keep him in mind there. But it's not a spot that it screams Panthers.
Yeah, it's tough with the Panthers. I mean, Cam's certainly carrying that team. He gets not enough credit for what he's doing this season for sure. Mike Conrad asking a question here. Peyton, Russell Wilson, Marcus Mariota. 3 quarterbacks. Interesting. I typically don't roster 3 quarterbacks. I think those bench spots are really prime real estate, and I don't overvalue the quarterback position. This is a tough one. I am right now, according to my rankings, and sometimes I question my rankings on Sunday mornings, but right now I do have Peyton Manning as the highest ranked of these 3. Not crazy about the options, but you look to the matchup. It's a reasonably good matchup. The secondary is not as good as people are saying they are. Marcus Peters is an average starter. We have to get off this. He's an elite corner because he's not. Ronald Darby, maybe, but not Marcus Peters out of the rookie class this year. Peyton Manning going to pick on him today and hopefully gets it done, has a little more zip on the ball than he did in the first meeting. So I do like him. Tough matchup for Russell Wilson. You don't like that. Arizona secondary is the real deal. So, and Mariota gets a really tough matchup this week. Don't buy into what you saw last week. So for me, Peyton Manning, Pat.
I'm a little bit lower on Manning this week than the consensus, and especially now with the news that Emmanuel Sanders is very iffy. It doesn't sound like he's going to go if you read the tea leaves. And the running game, I think they might try to lean on the running game a little bit more, kind of the way they did down the stretch last year. I have Wilson higher than him. He has a pretty good history against the Cardinals. They're a high blitz team. A lot of times, you can get past that, with a scrambling quarterback. So I think Wilson's going to add a few extra yards with his legs, a few extra points with his legs. And I think that Jimmy Graham is starting to come on a little bit. He's had 2 of the last 3 games. He's had double-digit targets. And again, with the blitzes, Wilson's been pretty successful going to Graham. So it's close, but I do have Wilson just above Peyton.
So flipping a coin between Wilson and Peyton Manning there. Tough decision, certainly, but remember that those bench spots, high-quality, upside handcuffs. Roll the dice on those guys there. With the Starks news from Greg, he says, how much do you bump him up in cash games? And yeah, he's a significant discount over DeAngelo Williams, although I'm not taking DeAngelo Williams out of my lineups. I think he's about as chalk as they come this week, going up against a weak Browns defense where they're going to have to rely heavily on the run. Landry Jones is really it's not a good scenario here. Just go back and watch that Kansas City game. You'll see what I mean. This could be a really low-scoring game, but heavy volume for DeAngelo Williams. And the blocking, none of that changes, so at least you got that going here. However, bumping him up, yes. I actually had Darren McFadden in over him. Now I'm going to probably pivot off and go to Starks, and that gives me a little bit of play. I think it's another $1,000 on FanDuel, a play that I already had Starks in my DraftKings lineup, so I'm not worried there. But just a quick remark there. All right, Lee asking a question. He's a running back and a flex in a full PPR league, full-point PPR. Duke Johnson, Jonathan Stewart, Jeremy Langford, Michael Floyd, John Brown. Now, we look to these wide receivers in Seattle, and the wide receivers most likely to see Sherman, we expect Sherman to play his side, not shadow today, are Michael Floyd and John Brown. So I'm going to downgrade those guys. For me, then it comes down to Stewart's obviously locked in between Langford and Duke Johnson. I actually like Langford just slightly more. I think the volume's going to be there, plus Johnny Manziel isn't his quarterback. It's a tough matchup, but for me, Langford and Stewart. What about you, Pat?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth with Duke Johnson. You can't trust him with Johnny Manziel back there. Same thing with Gary Barnidge. We saw last week, they said after the game that Duke was taken out by game flow or whatever. He was taken out by Johnny Manziel. I mean, it's as simple as that. I'd love to see Duke more involved. They should get him more involved, but you can't trust him with Manziel. I agree, Stewart and Langford based on volume, and especially into one PPR.
Yep, got to go with those guys. Rob asking a question. He says, good morning. Well, good morning, Rob. He's asking about tight ends. And, boy, you have a lot of tight ends. Eric Ebron, Jason Witten, Gary Barnidge, or Zach. I guess, is that Zach Miller?
Ertz?
Zach Ertz? I don't know. There isn't somebody who's like Prince-worthy, just one name, Madonna. At Kanye at the tight end position. Maybe it is Zach Ertz there. We looked through these guys, and you're saying you're leaning Ebron. I think that's fair. I have Ebron and Witten pretty close here. I would probably give the upgrade just slightly to Ebron, but it is close. And again, Stafford, I guess I'd lean him over Matt Castle. That's crazy that I have to say it that way. But, yeah, I agree. They're both back-end, like, borderline TE1s this week, so maybe I do lean Ebron. What about you, Pat?
Yeah, I agree. I have him really close as well. I think Witten's probably the better floor play. You probably feel a little bit safer with him if you're good with your matchup. But if you need a little more upside, Ebron and the anticipated game script there, which should probably be a little more high-paced than what Dallas and Tampa are going to have. So, yeah, Ebron for ceiling, Witten for floor.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so Matt Miller has an IDP question. One out of C.J. Mosley, Vincent Ray, Vontaze Burfict, Malcolm Smith. It's Malcolm Smith. Mosley, as I said, struggling a little bit to put up tackle productions. He's an LB2 at this point. Vincent Ray, not guaranteed an every down role. So he's trending downward with Burfict back. I like Burfict. I'm holding Burfict, but I want to see it before I start him. We've seen it with Malcolm Smith, so I am going Malcolm Smith there. I think he's a back-end LB1 this week. That's where I have him ranked, so I'd fire him up. All right, looking to the news, the active, inactives here. In St. Louis, we got St. Louis, Chicago. Pernell McPhee, we mentioned earlier, going to be inactive. Matt Forte, inactive. Not a big surprise. Shea McClellan is active. Okay, Jonathan Anderson owners. Shouldn't have probably picked him up anyway, but this is why you don't just look at the stats. He had 12 tackles. Oh, he's got to be awesome. He's the next Ray Lewis. No, he didn't really play that well, and he was really in because McClellan was out. Looks like McClellan will be back in there starting, playing every down. McClellan's an LB3. That's what you get. St. Louis, we have TJ McDonald and Robert Quinn both active in this game. That is not good for Chicago, and it's good for IDP purposes. Otherwise, let's see. There's a running back, Pat. A kid he plays for St. Louis, I think. Yes, please, more, lots. 35 carries, please. Love him, and I actually kind of like having a little piece of the passing game here for Chicago. Surprisingly enough, I wouldn't be fading Alshon Jeffrey in season long. I'm not going away from Martellus Bennett. Langford, as we said, RB2-ish. Back end RB2, Cutler, 2 quarterback leagues. So not really that overly concerned, but it could be a long day for Chicago.
Yeah, I'm trying to get fit Gurley into my cash lineup. It's not easy, especially on FanDuel. He's pretty pricey, but without Pernell McPhee, I mean he's Chicago's top graded run defender. He's top graded defender, but top graded run defender as well. So I don't know. I don't see how they're going to stop Gurley. I mean, and Fisher loves to just keep handing it to him until he eventually breaks 1 or 2. So if you can swing it, if you're confident with some lower price guys, and you can get Gurley in there, maybe have him with Starks if you're not going to go with D. Will. It's going to pay off, I would imagine.
And just seeing some news here, smiling. Ben Roethlisberger is active. He's not starting, but I love this guy. He just wants to play so badly that you could cut his leg off. He'll still be out there. Not going to start. He's going to back up Landry Jones, but is actually active. So craziness there. Obviously, hey, I've had some people asking questions about Landry Jones. I can't trust this guy whatsoever. And if anything happens, we could potentially see Ben Roethlisberger. That's crazy. But either way, coming down the home stretch here, make sure you get those questions in if you have them. Matt has a follow-up about the IDP. He said, Jamie Collins, any insight on the illness? Yeah, the guy was really sick, couldn't eat, really weak. I mean, it just happens. I've been there. We've all had probably those sicknesses. You get the flu, you can't eat. You're just not yourself for a couple weeks. So for them, they want to win football games. Jonathan Freeney gives them a chance to do that at the linebacker position. So that's that. And what do you think about Derek Carr with the potential wins or Carson Palmer in a bad matchup? I'm not really worried about this whole wind gate or whatever it is now. It is what it is, and quarterbacks can still throw the football. I mean, Derek Carr gets some velocity on the ball. He'll cut through 20-mile-an-hour winds. I'm using him over Carson Palmer. Pat, do you disagree?
I do have Palmer higher. They're super close. I have Palmer higher. He's just going to go away from Sherman. You got Kerry Williams defending either Floyd or John Brown, and you obviously have Fitzgerald in the slot. So he's going to have places to go with the ball. I can't imagine Arizona's going to be able to run very well against Seattle. I do have Palmer higher, lower than where you usually have him in this matchup. But, I don't mind starting either one of those quarterbacks.
And one final question here to wrap the show up. With Lacy out, Pat, are you moving James Starks up over LeGarrette Blount? I have LeGarrette Blount as a top 10 play. With it sounding like Marshawn Lynch, the Seahawks aren't going to count on him. I may remove him from my rankings here, which pushes LeGarrette Blount to 7 in my rankings. I don't think I can put Starks ahead of him. It's going to be really, really close, but I don't think I could do that. Maybe I have him as a back-end RB1. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm high on Blount. This that's an interesting way of putting that. But yeah, no, I'm all I'm all about Blount this week. But yeah, I mean Starks, rockets up the rankings with the Lacy news as well. But I wouldn't put him above Blount.
Yeah, not going to put him there. And keep in mind, John Beeson, on injured reserve. Wani Unga out in this game. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to run up the gut there.
Yeah,
also, Jonathan Hankins on injured reserve. I mean, come on, LeGarrette Blount. But I'm not worried about Tom Brady, by the way. Nice high floor with Tom Brady. Doesn't get any higher than Brady and Blount. So we're going to do that. That's going to do it for the show today. So Good guys, thanks. This is awesome. Love interacting with you every Sunday. We'll be back again, so best of luck to you. We're making that playoff push here. Remember, head on over to the site, Pro Football Focus. Get all the awesome content, tools, projections, rankings, all that fun stuff. So check it on out. For Pro Football Focus, he's Pat, and I'm Jeff, and that is a wrap.